Hello, so you want to add particle effects to your weapon. So there's a couple ways to do that. The most simplest way is to base a weapon off of either the torch or the uh, glowing axe, the glimmer stone or whatever axe it is. But I'll show you how to do all that and using one of my weapons as an example. Hop into. So first, before we get into all the shiny bits and the nitty gritty, I'm just going to go over a few things for this, as far as the visuals go. So this is your main, the details pane, and there's a few things that may be relevant here for this. The default trail particle and the weapon trails. So this by default is a distortion. Let's actually open up a regular weapon to compare to. So I'm going to open up the item table, and that's fine. A plain, no special stuff. See, it's BP game item weapon, so that's just the default regular, no special thing. Okay, so here we've got a regular mace. So this is the same on all of the vanilla weapons. Distort, heavy, sunder, shield smash, purple ink. So this is the swishy effect that happens when you either pull out your weapon or swing, and the same thing with this. And then Inky also. So, okay, with all of these weapon trails, they get called by the different animation montages that kind of control what an animation does, as far as what kind of sound effects does that animation have, what kind of weapon trails does it have. So I will show you that right now, just so you have kind of a better context and frame of reference. Go back over to my mod controller, since I things that modify that, and let's see, I do for my mod have a base overriding animation. So this is the combo rules type of item table or data table, and it has just information on damage multipliers, on what happens when you hit somebody, as far as knockback, when you hit somebody who's blocking, what you do when blocking, what happens when you shield break somebody, and then various combo effects that happen, that are built into that combo type. And yeah, penetrate, shield smash, all that. So anyway, what we want to look at for this is the combo montage. So with all of the animation attacks and all that stuff, there are two parts of that. There's the animation montage, which is a collection of all of this different animation data, and then there's the animation sequence, which is just the raw animation itself with no special anything. So just a quick note to anybody that modifies or wants to switch up an animation or add an animation, or what my mod does is it adds new movesets, and it uses base game animations and kind of reorders those or modifies those. So anytime you do that, you want to save an animation, and then you also want to resave the animation sequence, and then make sure that your animation montage here loads that new animation sequence, because what happens is your mod it basically has reference issues, and it's going to look at the default Conan files, which it can't quite access, and you're going to get weird stuff like T-posing. So anytime you add a new animation, or you want to modify an animation, save the animation montage, the AM file, into your mod, and then go here to one of these, the animation sequence, open that up, save that into your mod file, and then make sure that your animation montage here points to the resaved animation sequence that you have. So anyway, all that aside, particle effect stuff and weapon trails. So down here, I have a bunch of information. I'm not going to get to that now. The significant thing here is the weapon trail notify state and the other different forms of notifies, like bleed, cripple, and what that does is the animation has a built-in weapon trail that it calls, and in this case, if this is the default one, and then say, if you wanted to bleed in here, you put bleed, or you look at the animation that you're working with, and if it says bleed, then back to our animation blueprint, our visual blueprint. When you change the bleed one here, or one of the others, weapon trail notify state, one of these, it's gonna call that. So that's why that matters. Okay, and just since we're here, one of the other significant things, or if you want to make your weapon mounted, and generally should be, there's not much of a reason not to, you go to combo type mounted and go down to here, and you've got mounted chopping, clubbing, and spear, slashing, bow, lance. Those are the different ones that you want to use. Just keep in mind that every animation, animation montage has its own place, its own socket that a weapon is connected to. So your grip for your weapon is going to be in different places depending on if it's a spear animation. You might have a sword or something like that, or this mace, and you think it's going to go into the right hand, but it may actually be 5 feet away from the right hand, depending on how everything is built as far as the models go. So there's that. The sound transmitter type, which just controls the sound set, and then there's this section here, the animation package section, and this is the item equip animation, which you don't want to have be something looping, because then crazy things will happen, and you can make it an attack, but there are ups and downsides to that have to be considered, so I would be careful about doing that. And then the blend space is the motion move set, if you have a spear, it's that how you look when you're moving around with a spear, or the two-handed hammer, sword, or something like that. And then everything else is probably a bit self-explanatory, or if you play the game enough and the different sets and everything like that, then when you go to these different animations, you'll make the connection as, oh, okay, this is what this is. And then another big thing, really important, the socket that the weapon equips to. That's basically actually, let's show you. So I've got a animation right here, and so you kind of just assume, okay, a weapon just gets attached to the right hand, right? That's generally the case, but that is because the animation skeleton, the Conan skeleton, has these different invisible sockets which are basically slots that weapons can go in, or particle effects, or invisible extra reach bounding boxes will get attached to, and they're not always rotated in directions that you think, so you always want to test things vigorously. So anyway, socket main versus this is off the right hand, of course. But this is the skeleton tree of the animation montage, and it has all that good information. Socket secondary, that's the other socket that you'll probably be using. Say if you make an offhand weapon or something like that, it's going to attach to the socket secondary. Or what the daggers do, which is a kind of a quirky example, is it clones the animation, or the model in the main socket, and pops that over to the socket secondary. Anyway, let's go back to, so that's generally, this is what you want. Okay, so we're gonna go back to my example, and I've got stuff here. I have a particle system, which is, I'm gonna open that up, particle effect, and this is one pretty much taken from the base game, and actually that is the base game one, and it's looping and everything like that. got a point light, and the point light, this is basically the total area that it can affect, which seems a bit more than it is. But for these values and things, I mean, it comes down to testing. You can show a floor, and it depends on the scale of everything going on. You may see stuff, you may not, but you pretty much want to make a change, hit play, or new editor, window the pie, and then jump in and see what it looks like. Okay, so how do you do this, and what does all this crap mean? So over here, you've got the component scene information, all of the different parts of the visual blueprint here, and some of them say inherited. That comes from the parent class, which is a base weapon. That's the main actual weapon type. Torches, by the way, don't use this. Think something else. And then you've got the animation trail and this particle system, and then you can see its materials. If it will automatically attach to a certain socket, if that socket is available, isn't entirely necessary. I have it auto managed, but pretty much all of this is default settings. And then you've got your point light. How do we make this work? How do we replicate this, or duplicate, I should say, this effect? So the first thing I'm gonna do is, let's just do it from scratch. I've got my mace moveset here, and I'm going to resave that as a different file. I have a whole visual blueprints because I have a bunch of different things in my mod. So I'm just gonna call this test weapon. I'm gonna save it. So now I can mess with the mace without having to worry about breaking stuff. So I've got nothing here. So let's just do some stuff. So we're gonna go to add component, and we want to add a point light. So go up here, point light. I can keep that as that name. 10. We're gonna send this to some wild color just so we can see it easily. Okay, so now I have this test weapon, and the visual object is pointing to here. So let's just launch this and see what happens. Okay, welcome to my house of 1,000 corpses. Messy. Okay, so I'm going to find that weapon. What do we call it? Back. We called it, oh yeah, we just left it as flawless studded iron mace. So that will be slightly awkward, but. So in this category, gear, these are weapons or armor, whatever, that have no special properties. They have nothing in the game item weapon. So anything in the other category as special, some kind of special blueprint in the action blueprint for the item class, sorry. Okay, so let's check. I think that bottom one was it. We'll find out. Yep, 2219, that's the start of my mod. Okay, here it is. Hey, look, it has a red light, and that is all that took. But, well, you can, adjust the settings of the attenuation radius and the intensity for that. But the thing is, it's right at the hand, and maybe we don't want that at the hand. So there's two ways that we can address that. We can either move it in the blueprint itself. So I'm gonna hop over for a second. My Night Scourge Mace, and so we've got this point light here. Or actually, let's go to our particle system. So you can kind of tell this is not at the point of the 000 origin, which in this case would be the center of the hand right here. So you can manually move that and adjust that and Conan will just scale it no matter what, so that, you know, if you're using a improved quality of life mod where you can scale your hand size and that may affect the size of the weapons, it'll scale the whole visual weapon up. So, you know, including particle effects and stuff like that. So that part is fine. So you can do it that way, or in the blueprint itself, if you have another socket or something to attach it to, you know, you can do an attached component, which I'll get to. So in the case, if the particular weapon has a socket like tip or grip or special effects slot socket, something like that, then this is another way to do it that, you know, may save you some work potentially. But in my case, some of the models I worked with didn't have that, or it didn't necessarily make sense to add one of those extra sockets to the model, not to the animation skeleton. So one thing that we end up doing is adjusting it in the viewport. So one of the things that we end up doing is adjusting it in the view. Go and cancel this, and we're gonna go to the test weapon. So you're like, okay, great. I don't see anything here to have a kind of frame of context of what the heck do I do. So what I like to do is, you know, first I go up to the root here, the scene component. I go to add component and static mesh, because these static meshes are meshes that don't have any kind of bones or animation capabilities. And then I'm gonna just actually go and load up the, I'm just gonna pick the item that I want to stick something onto, and now we've got something to reference. So simplest thing to do, be careful about hitting undo when you're in a data table. If you don't know this, it can do weird things and potentially wipe out a whole bunch of your entries, and you may have to remake or reload your data table if you don't export it and have a backup. So you've got to be very careful about undoing in the Conan Exiles or Unreal Devkit. It's pretty terrible. People will tell you horror stories. So anyway, I've got this static mesh and I've got a point light. So the static mesh, really I should rename that reference model. So this is just a temporary thing. This is not going to stay. So once we adjust things as we need, we're going to get rid of this. So this point light, I'm going to drag this up here. Oh, I want this, you know, Darth Mace looking thing. You know, all this evil red glow right there. And I'm going to save it. Now, something interesting is going to happen when you, say if oops, I forgot to add this because it just seems fine. So let's see what happens when we leave a static mesh on a visual blueprint. So it doesn't seem like anything is happening, but what you can't tell is that I'm right now just trying to move backwards, and I'm trying to move right. All kinds of weird stuff is happening, and that's happening more or less because there's a collision overlap that causes Conan Exiles to freak out, because two things are occupying the exact same space and a bunch of other stuff. But all that aside, we can see that the adjustment work, and the light is in the exact place that we want it. So let's go back. Oh, also, so with the Fashionist mod, because I don't know, I haven't seen a server out there, I think that doesn't use test release good work. It will skin a weapon on, you know, over any static mesh it finds. So if I had the Fashionist mod loaded and I skinned a mace on top of that, it would duplicate the mace for multiple instances. It would do it for the main visual static mesh, of course, but it would also do it for the reference model. So it would make two maces. So if I had, I don't know, the truncheon or a star metal mace, it would duplicate that, which there are some cases where you might actually want something like that. I'll show you an example. go to my jungle. So here's an example of a thing that has multiple static meshes. Are those skeletal meshes? Anyway, so depending on, so interesting things can happen. But when you have multiple meshes in the scene, normally you would run into that collision issue where your character was going to start flipping out and, you know, flying up into space and inputs aren't going to work right. What solves that, if this is a situation that you have attachments on the mesh attachments on the model in the blueprint, the visual blueprint, there's a setting for these things. Collision. Let's see. So collision presets, by default, it's usually at I think either block all dynamic, I think is what the default is. So if you set this to no collision, and then and if you have multiple static meshes, skeletal meshes, any kind of meshes in your scene, and you group them under one thing, and auto meld, where's auto? Okay, never mind. Okay, so I have in my mod offhand weapons that can be skinned with fashionist. Because let's face it, it's a feature that should have been in the base game. You know, just kind of a modern feature that Testerly added that everybody pretty much loves that has it. So, but there's a case where you can't have, or some weapons won't behave right if you skin over them. You know, for offhand weapons or and that's because those weapons have collision set on their static mesh. Loading. So this I would be able to skin. It works, you know, in game because it has it's set to no collision. Go to my print. Okay, so in this particular case, since this is based off of the offhand axe to give it, you know, an attack, I go down here to throwing knife or wherever, you know, the collision is, and no collision is set, and that's what allows me to skin, say, another mace over it. So that's just something to keep in mind, that anywhere that there's a mesh, an added mesh in your visual scene, you want to have that collision off. Okay, now let's get back to the particle effects. I'm kind of jumping around and going over some of these different things because these are things that once you kind of start down this road of adding details to weapons, you're probably at some point gonna stop by some of these things and considerations. Oh yeah, also on this particular blueprint, in the event graph, I have a thing that rotates it because this blueprint for this weapon attaches to the offhand, the socket secondary, and the socket secondary is reversed because it's, I guess, made towards geared towards daggers and offhand weapons. So I have it set relative rotation and the collision disabled on here was kind of a duplicate thing that probably doesn't need to exist. I'm not. I'm definitely not a great blueprint guy. There's probably things that people are going to be able to point out that need to be cleaned up, which is fine with me. And I actually want to talk to one of the real guys about kind of cleaning up some things in my mod, because I would rather do things as cleanly as possible. But the way we kind of have to learn here, that's not always a capability. Okay, so anyway, the test weapon. So we're gonna keep this here for now. Oh yeah, so even if you say unload this, you go to clear, it could still form, still cause issues, as well as if you skin something over it in Fashionist in game and you have a static mesh slot that's empty. Say for whatever reason I had this rotated. Once you skin it in with Fashionist, you're gonna have a mace appearing over the normal model where it is, and then also any kind of static or any kind of mesh instance here. So I'm gonna have a different mace. I'm gonna skin it with a star metal mace. It's gonna show up in the normal slot upright, and it's gonna replace this one. So you're gonna have two things. So you just need to delete this outright once you're done. But I'm gonna keep this here for while we're working on it. Let's go back to the scene root and add a component and a particle system. And so let's go over here to template, and I'm pick something. So some of these things, some of the particles here, you can't use. You can use them in a dev kit, but they won't work in game because they are assets that Conan, I guess, purchased through the marketplace and doesn't have the licensing to extend to us. So I'm gonna go with this one that doesn't have a little mark over it, which I think is it's either like a marketplace thing that won't work in game, or just some kind of way around that. I don't know at this time. Apologize. But it also shows this for your own custom particle effects. So I'm just gonna go here to this altar of bat fire brazier fire cone blue. It's the things in the bat altar, and pretty similar to the volcano serpent men fires. So okay, here we go. We've got a particle system right now, and I'm gonna hit W to switch it to move. WER for move, scale, rotate. And I've got this whole thing. So really the easiest thing to do is to adjust it from here, and then you can mess around with your scaling. Particle effects and scaling work in some not always how you expect, because sometimes they're just sprites more or less that are rendered from the camera and not necessarily entirely in 3D space. Yes and no. So you just want to make sure you're looking at everything from all the different angles, because you may scale something along the z-axis, but it actually widens it or widens certain particles more than others. So you just want to be pretty careful with that. Okay, so I've got that. These are just the different materials, and for a lot of these things, you can switch these out, and you may get some worthwhile, some cool behavior. You may get some things that just don't work. If you find something here in the material that you changed, you want to save a copy of that material in your mod folder, and then have your weapon point to that copy, because once you get in game, if you don't have a mod version, then it's going to do some weirdness. So I'm gonna save this, and I'm going to out just for visuals. Eventually we're gonna need to delete that reference model. I have correcting that does its thing. Basically like but you see No, clearly that's the same visual effect, but you see there's some little poofy smoke particles, some little puff particles. So what's that about? That's the animation trail. So, which also, hey, look, it does that. Unequip it. So on certain animations, you know, we can see a corruption pixie sparkles. So there's an animation, that first animation is calling the weapon trail, and I have a weapon trail loaded in that, and so it appears. So take a look at it. Up to, you could either do class defaults or just click over here, either one, and then we've got a few things going. That scourge fire, that's that effect. So that particular animation montage, that mace light attack 1, just happens to call this weapon trail. Not all the weapons, and as you saw, not all of the animation combos do that. So that's something you kind of have to know your combo rules and your animations, tables and montages and all that. But also, the default trail particle, that's a particle that's just going to be there all the time. And depending on the nature of the particle effect, or the particle system, I should say, that's the official name. If the particle system is something that's just constantly going, looping, then it's going to stay. Otherwise, it'll appear when you call out the weapon, and then it'll fade if it's a non-looping thing. Or if something calls the trail particle, or just calls an animation trail, then it's going to pick up this one, unless it specifies, hey, I want a heavy trail or a inky trail or something like that. So that's something it's generally you gotta play with these to figure that out. So audio is going to be a thing. I don't have a lot of experience with those. Take a look. The first one thing to do, can reference Conan audio component. So all of these I based this off of a torch, and they sort of work. I haven't updated them, so it's kind of a bad example, but I'm gonna go and let's do a Conan audio. It's fire crackle. Look at our old mod or example. Okay, so we've got the sound in 2 places: audio asset, or for dream world, and then sound. Go back to the test weapon. Let's see. Let's do. So the cues are useful because they are basically a collection of all the different random sounds that can play, so that you're not hearing the same sound all the time. And they're the light blue ones. It's basically a blueprint that's a group object that has all of these different sounds attached to it. So I'm just gonna pick one, and I'm gonna update it here too. Now I don't have sounds turned on this video, but let's see. And I also don't have sounds, turned on right now, but got the volume multiplier, pitch multiplier, attenuation. That I think kind of controls, what it sounds like, and possibly the way that sound falls off or gets distorted. Basically an audio filter. Probably all we need. So I'm gonna compile this. See what happens. Actually, now that I have my speakers on, maybe you can hear that through my speakers. That's playing. So let's see what happens. Oh yeah. don't know if you can hear that. So probably should have chosen a more obvious sound like a goat hollering or something like that, just so it's clear that it's working. But that's how you do that. Now there are more advanced things that you can do, but for the, I mean, as always, but for the most part, this is going to work pretty well. And once the weapon is gone, that's it. You know, it doesn't stay in the world. There are certain cases where it depends on the particle effect. You need to make sure that the particle effect is set to terminate once it's done. Most are, or I think probably all of them are by default. But if you go making custom particle effects, you need to make sure that it doesn't, that it actually disappears and doesn't stay in the world, because then you'll have no way to get rid of it, and it won't go away until the server restarts. I mentioned that because I had when I was testing and making these basically anti-undead and anti-demon bombs for my mod, I would throw them, and then those would just stay there. They would just be going. You know, I'd reload the test environment, and in certain cases there'd be a whole bunch of fires around for me testing until I you know, made sure that my particle effects were terminating properly. So yeah, the only other thing is to just go and delete that reference model so that you don't have collision freakouts. Save and recompile. So now there is something that occasionally happens, and I don't, maybe somebody knowledge or decent knowledge will be able to explain this to me at some point, but sometimes I'll duplicate a blueprint, you know, just as we just did to start all of this, and you know, you would kind of think, okay, everything would be there, but then the particle effects or the audio or the point lights don't actually load in game, like as if the references weren't properly linked or something. So sometimes I just end up just straight copying and pasting them into my model from a working source, you know, even though it's one of my my blueprints. So just watch out for that. If you make a say a set of weapons, and you know, you duplicate one to make the others, just test them, of course, and if the effects just don't show up, just straight up copy and paste them onto your new thing. It's just a weird quirk that I encounter a lot. Beyond that, that's pretty much it. You know, there's always that bit of experimentation and testing you'll need to do, but yeah, you can have fun. All right, take care.